Hi there. About to start my day of Korean studying, but I want to talk a little bit about what I would call language freedom, again with reference to the situation in Ukraine. Notice I'm learning now not to say the Ukraine. There was a report in the paper that the leader of the Svoboda or Freedom Party, which is in fact quite a far right party, according to the press. Again, it's so hard to tell from just reading the press because different journalists have different axes to grind. But that the leader, who has some unpronounceable Ukrainian name, Tiana Gabok or something, I'd have to hear it a few times before I could be able to pronounce it, supposedly said that speaking Russian should be criminalized in the Ukraine, which I'm sure he can't have said something so stupid. But the issue in the Ukraine is the official status for Russian. My understanding is that close to a quarter of the citizens of the Ukraine speak Russian as a first language, regardless of whether they are ethnic Ukrainians, ethnic Russians, or whatever. And that Yanukovych in 2012 brought in a law which made it possible in any region of the Ukraine where a language had more than 10% of the population speaking that as a first language, that it would achieve official status. I have no idea what official status meant. And now the new group have decided to repeal that law, and that gets the Ukrainians fighting amongst each other like nothing else. I mean, in Canada, we have similar issues. The province of Quebec, French has official status in Canada, but has official status in only two provinces, Quebec and New Brunswick. English does not have official status in Quebec, although probably three quarters of a million people or more speak English as their first language in Quebec. And I don't think that's by itself a problem, because if people can go about leading their lives freely using whatever language they want, I think that's the main thing. Official status implies that everything has to be translated into these languages, all laws, all documents, everything, and it becomes again sort of bureaucratic overkill. But in Quebec, of course, they go beyond just giving French official status or denying English official status. I should point out, by the way, as a result of the measures taken to protect the French language in Quebec, primarily as a result of that, probably, I don't know, half the English-speaking population over the last 20, 30 years has left the province. The problem in Quebec is that in addition to this official status issue, they seem to be bound and determined to discourage bilingualism, to deny the fact that the city of Montreal is in fact very bilingual. If you're in the center of Montreal, you can speak English or French, and you meet people who are quite fluent in both. And now the government recently came out and said, this is bad. We have creeping bilingualism, as if it's something evil. They even had a minister, because in Quebec they sort of alternate between the separatists and federalists who run the province. And there was a minister who said Montreal is no more bilingual than Rome. This was the minister of government who said that, which is, complete nonsense. Montreal is one of the most bilingual places in the world. Rome is not particularly bilingual at all. And now we have this lady saying, we have creeping bilingualism. It's okay, people learn languages on their own, like English, Spanish, Mandarin. But no, the issue is English, because that's the biggest language group. It's like close to 10% of the population speaks English as their first language. And if you include people who might have been born speaking Italian but now speak English, it's probably a larger number. She says there's a difference with what is institutional. No, in other words, anything institutional has to be French, and we have to apply that without mercy, she says. So a company that, for example, she's upset that people greet customers by saying bonjour, hi. That's no good. You should only greet them saying bonjour. So, and there's all kinds of stories on the excesses of the sort of language policy in Quebec, where they prosecute Italian restaurants for calling pasta pasta instead of pat, and things of that nature. What's wrong with being bilingual? Sweden is more bilingual than Quebec. English is much more widely spoken in Sweden than in Quebec. It hasn't hurt the Swedish language. allowing English to be widely spoken in Quebec, encouraging bilingualism, encouraging the use of English, the most widely used international language, is not going to hurt the French language. It's up to the speakers of French to improve the quality and the level and the usefulness of that language. So that's just the Quebec example. But then if we go to the Ukraine, I don't know, criminalize Russian? I mean, whatever the reasons are that the Russian is spoken so widely, having to do with Tsarist Russia, Soviet Union, I don't know. Those people are there and that's the language they use. Why would you want to put a stigma on speaking what is in fact an international language and a very useful international language in that part of the world? Ukraine is part of that space, Russian-speaking space. Russian is a major international language with, internationally recognized works of literature and whatever and so forth. I don't understand why you would want to stigmatize that language. By the way, in Quebec, the separatists have essentially tried to stigmatize English as something bad, anti the national project. And it's interesting on nationalism, which is going to be a big issue in the Ukraine because a large percentage of the people who have been protesting and who now have power are nationalists. And it's interesting, some of these quotes I found here. Nationalism is power hunger tempered by self-deception, George Orwell. Let's see, there were some others I had found here. Nationalism is like cheap alcohol. First it makes you drunk, then it makes you blind, then it kills you. So there was one that was particularly good. Here, the difference between patriotism and nationalism is that the patriot is proud of his country for what it does, and the nationalist is proud of his country no matter what it does. The first attitude creates a feeling of responsibility, but the second, a feeling of blind arrogance that leads to war. Whatever. Anyway, I think that if the Europeans are going to help Ukraine, they should make very sure that the minority language rights are protected. And it hasn't been the case, even in places like Riga. I go to Riga, half the city speaks Russian. You don't see a Russian sign. Russian has kind of been cleansed. Cultural cleansing has taken place. I don't think that's right. Even though most of those Russians moved there under the Soviet Union, and yes, the Soviet Union annexed Latvia, and there was great injustice, and 10% of the Latvian population was shipped to the Gulag, and all of this other stuff. But we're at now the year 2014, and those people live there, and they speak Russian. Now, by the same token, I can sympathize with the Latvians or the Ukrainians who want to make sure that their language survives, and that they would like to see Ukrainian be recognized as a language on the same footing as Polish, as other Slavic languages, which are similar and in some cases comprehensible to other Slavic language speakers, but which is different. So, I mean, the thing is not black and white, but given some of the overheated rhetoric coming out of the Ukraine, I really hope that the European Union watches carefully to make sure that any government of the Ukraine that is not inclusive and that is deliberately basically stigmatizing certain languages or certain language speakers or groups isn't supported in the way of any kind of financial assistance. Because I think language freedom, and I include in this Quebec and anywhere else where language hotheads are denying language rights to a group based on some great national principle, some nationalist ideology, that we don't accept this. People should be free to speak the language they want, use the language they want at their place of work, and that should be something that can be reconciled with constructive measures to build up the education in the language of the country or of the group. Like in Quebec, it's not a country, but it is a semi-autonomous body politic, and they have every right to work for the survival of French, but it needn't be at the expense of the rights of English speakers. So, pretty muddled situation, and so my rant is pretty muddled. Now I better get back.